Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to the NOVICE quarterfinal of NUDC 2024. Congratulations for making it this far. My name is Satwika, I'll be your chair for this round. Judging with me is Kak Icha, Celine, Cynthia, and juga Il. Before we begin the debate, there are several reminders I would like to give to you. First of all, as always, please be mindful of this tournament's equity policy. I'm pretty sure that you guys know how to do so. Second of all, no electronic device for you to be used to time keep yourself. LO will assist you with that. But most importantly, for observers, because there's a lot of observers in this room, I have two reminders to keep that you need to keep in mind. Number one, unless you are part of the organizing committee, recording this debate is strictly prohibited. Do not do so. But second of all, please maintain order during the debate. You can do this by not doing several things. First of all, you cannot speak loudly during the debate. Second of all, you cannot go in and out of the room. But third of all, and most importantly, do not make any expression throughout the debate that might disturb the debaters. Do not shout here. Do not make faces when someone is speaking and whatnot. Right, with that out of the way, we can just start the debate calling upon Prime Minister here.
So by expansion, meaning there's going to be lots of countries that is wanting to join NATO organization. And as we all know, not every country is not really good with each other because there's a country that have a tendency to have a cold war with each other. Now, as the info site say that NATO is one of the organization that has like agreement upon intergovernment alliance. Now, when NATO is not going to be very exclusive, as we know. Like when doing expansion, there is going to be like lots of countries or intergovernment that wanting to join. So because they would do anything to have the accessibility of the agreement of the military alliance and collective security. Why? Because of course it's NATO. The NATO, the organization itself, is going to guarantee these countries' safety. That is why they is going to compete to become part of this organization. Especially in status quo, there's lots of geopolitical problem as in what happens right now. So why this is something that is very regrettable. So with expansion, there is going to be like lots of countries compete to join, and this can create a tension between these countries, like even countries that really doesn't have tension with each other. Like we can see what happened to Russia and Ukraine, because of course these countries, they want to be protected, and because they wanting to join NATO, the tension between Russia and Ukraine is happening. Of course, it is already happening even before NATO, but because of that, the tension between Ukraine and Russia is getting even worse. Now, here is the counterfactual. If NATO did not expand their organization like that much, of course, like this is something that is preventable. Yes, we know there is a tension even before Ukraine wanting to join NATO, but the tension is getting really low, like every day. But since Ukraine wants to join NATO, and this is something that is really offending to Russia, so Russia decided to do something that is really bad to like Ukraine, and that is what happened right now. And this is a NATO that doesn't really help this country that is wanted to join, because they can still be more sufferable, even though NATO is promised them with a military alliance or even collective security, because of course, like these countries, if the tension that has not been there, but because of this NATO expansion, they wanted to compete again. They wanted to join. They're going to be compete against each other, and their tension is going to be even really bad, and especially if like what happened to Russia in Ukraine. NATO doesn't really help Ukraine in return, even though Ukraine haven't joined NATO, and they're still suffer until right now. And it is going to be better in our side of the house, because so that's it for me. So proud to propose.
Thank you for the speech. To open the case in opposition, I call upon leader of opposition here.
Mic check. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, before I start my argument, let us engage with a couple of the arguments given to us brought to this debate by the opening government. First, they argue that nations wanting to join NATO actually create tension in the world, right? That's what they bring to this debate. They give an example of Russia and Ukraine. We disagree with that. We argue that actually this tension between nations can actually be solved by a further expansion of NATO itself. Secondly, they brought into this debate that Ukraine wanting to join NATO is somehow creating tension because it is offensive to Russia. What they did not bring to this debate, however, is the reason why Russia might actually find that Ukraine wanting to join NATO is offensive. So we will explain that to you. Russia has imperialistic tendencies. It always has since the USSR days, right? And it believes that Ukraine, after the breakup of the USSR, is still rightfully the territory of Russia, when it is actually not. When Ukraine is actually a self-governing country, a sovereign nation that has the right to defend itself. We believe in this right to defend yourself. That is why we are proud to oppose this motion. Okay, moving on to our arguments. First, before we understand why the expansion of NATO is actually good, we first need to understand why what NATO is, right? First, NATO is a defense alliance, as brought by the opening government. Attack on one NATO member is an attack on every NATO member. Now, what is the result of this? What is the result of this? This results in like a shared protection, right? It is basically used to defend smaller nations. For example, at its creation, there are 12 nations. A couple of them are actually smaller countries, like Netherlands or Belgium, countries that do not have the means to defend itself if the Red Army come knocking. That is why NATO was created, to defend this nation and to preserve the peace already achieved through blood, sweat, and tears in World War II, right? But that was NATO when at its inception. What is NATO now? What does it do now, right? We believe that NATO, as it is right now, is still a means to protect and ensure peace in Europe, right? It acts basically as a deterrent backed by the whole EU, the whole Europe, pretty much, and also the mighty firepower of the US, right? Now, as it is right now, NATO is the only shield protecting Europe from all-out war, from all-out Russian aggression. Why? We'll prove to you one by one, right? First, the aggression. We argue that this aggression is always there, and that is why NATO expansion is always necessary. When the USSR fell, again, a nation like Estonia, Latvia, smaller countries in the Baltic are running in droves to try to join NATO. Why? Because they realize that there is an inherent risk of Russia's imperialist tendencies. They want to protect their sovereign land that they managed to achieve, and the only way to protect that is by joining NATO and ensure that their safety, their livelihood, and their future is guaranteed, right? But what happens when things go wrong? There's a couple of examples for this. For example, one, Georgia, which was invaded by Russia, and Crimea and Ukraine by extension to that, right? These invasions, these unjustified invasions are proof of Russia's imperialistic tendency, that it proves that Russia is willing to expand its border by all means, and that includes war, right? This is the reason why nations now, like such as Finland and Sweden, countries who previously have remained neutral and have not joined NATO, are joining NATO because they realize that the risk of Russian imperialism is real, and they want to defend themselves. And the only way to do that, to ensure peace, to ensure stability, is to join NATO, right? The another thing is that NATO expansion is done willingly. Each nation that joins NATO have voted to join NATO. And not only that, but every single member of NATO has to agree until a new member can be appointed or can be inaugurated as a new member of NATO, right? That ensures that this organization is always harmonious because because in order for it to gain a new member, each member of the organization, of the existing organization, will also have to agree. This also limits NATO expansion so that it doesn't become too extreme. Why? Because if you have as many nations in NATO as it is right now, I believe right now is around 40 now, it will create more stricter standards for new nations to join in, right? So that reduces the tension between already NATO members and NATO neighbors that are in geographical NATO area, so that tensions in itself are reduced, right? Right. Another thing is that we argue that this NATO expansion is actually good. Why? Because it strengthens the alliance, right? The stronger the alliance, the more countries are in this alliance, the more countries are protected. The more countries are protected, the lesser conflict there will be in the world, right? For example, like we argue that it's good because why? Because if, ladies and gentlemen, if it were to happen, Ukraine was in NATO, then we wouldn't have this conflict. Why? Because Ukraine would be guaranteed, right? Russia would not attack a NATO member because it simply understands that its military might is no match for the combined force of NATO, right? For example, ladies and gentlemen, if the conflict between Ukraine and Russia didn't happen, we wouldn't have to deal with the things that we have to deal now. For example, we would have less expensive fertilizer because Ukraine and Russia is the massive exporter of fertilizer in the whole world. We would have cheaper grain products such as wheat. We would have cheaper oil because again, Russia is a major oil exporter, and if this conflict didn't happen, it wouldn't be sanctioned to heaven and back, right? This is why we argue that actually, ladies and gentlemen, the expansion of NATO further guarantees world peace, world trade, and in general are good for the benefit of the whole world. That is why we are proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. To continue the case in opening government, I call upon Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Am I clear enough? Okay. NATO is a great organization. It involves many great nations in this whole world, and it have it has a big powers and big like effect in international like in the world, right? So I'm here to tell you, judges, what are the most regrettable things on these expansions of NATO. First of all, the expansions itself expansion itself make like NATO leads the world, and it's already happens in our status quo. Well, as I tell you that NATO is a huge organization. It involves like all the greatest nations in the world. It has power, and other countries less likely want to have problem with it, right? So its expansions makes it kind of like rule the world right now. And what is bad about it? First, it is ruling the world means countries afraid of them, right? Because these big countries like have a back of each other's, and if we attack one country, if we have a problem with one country, we also have problems with other NATO members, and it leads to these other countries out of NATO. They don't want to have problem with these NATO members, NATO organization. So it leads to, if these NATO members, if they do bad, other countries less likely to oppose them. For example, we know that USA, they supports genocides on Palestinians, but we know that other countries, they don't want to, oppose this USA and do, big things to, for example, like maybe attacks USA for their support to this genocide, because they don't want to have problem with USA, because if you have problem with USA, you have problem with other NATO members. And this leads to normalization. And it is really happening right now. We normalize like everything that USA does, and everything like, for example, like other NATO members does, because basically we're afraid of them. Other countries afraid of NATO members. They're afraid of NATO members. And why this normalization is bad? This normalization leads to, these NATO members, basically do whatever they want to do, because they know that no countries would oppose them. No countries would, attack them because of the bad things they did. So next, because of its power, countries want to join them, right? Because of its NATO power, because they know, wow, NATO really have powers, and no countries want to oppose them. They really want to join this NATO. They want this NATO leaders support, the leaders, i.e. USA, UK, and other greatest nations in NATO. They want to join them because they want to have the, backing of NATO. They do anything to join NATO. So these NATO countries take advantage of it. How? They know how much these other countries want to be part of them, because they want the security of these NATO members. So they're most likely to be, and they are being the NATO leaders' puppet, like USA and UK puppet, because they know that this country would do anything to join NATO, and if they are being in NATO, they would do anything to have like the attention of these leaders like USA, UK, and etc. And this would be like NATO members. These great nations would take advantage for it. For what? Because they need these countries, for support those bad things they do, like I explained to you, like this support to genocide and etc. They need countries, many countries to support what they do, and they know that many countries want to join NATO because of it. They take advantage of it. They take these countries, they expand to have more support to support what they do. So respond to the OO cases. They say that this expansion would take the other members of NATO confirmations before they let these countries to join the NATO. But in the fact, in NATO itself, it has the most powerful countries. Not all countries in NATO have the same power. For example, like I explained, USA and UK, they are the most, the greatest nations in NATO. So if you say that it based on all members' confirmation, no, because in NATO itself, for example, if USA want it, so NATO would do it because other members used as puppet, just like I explained to you, they would do anything that USA told them to do because USA have the most powerful. So if they oppose this USA, they would not to get like the security, and USA would manipulate something to them and do bad things to them. That's why they most likely to do whatever what USA do. So this is bad because USA basically make them as their puppets, and it's really bad. And my next argument, how this NATO would threaten other countries. Countries afraid to have problem with NATO, I explained to you. If they have problem, not only the country that they have problem with, they have to face, but also the other NATO members, which are not a small countries. NATO members do whatever they want to do. It would lead to NATO members do whatever they want to do because they know that other countries less likely to have problem with them because if they have problem, they would also have to face USA and UK. That will lead to they do whatever they want to do. It makes them do bad things also because these NATO members have the back of USA, have the back of UK and Europe and etc. So these things also what makes other country really want to join this NATO, and we think it is really regrettable for these countries to have this desire because of its the expansions of NATO itself. So we think that NATO is pretty great enough. They have enough powers in the world. So the expansions is really regrettable in this world. So that's for me. So proud for pros. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. To continue the case in opening opposition, I call upon DLO Hirir.
Tes. Oke, audible. Kedengeran kan? Iya. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judges, before we go to our argument, let's respond to a couple of facts about what the government are standing for. Firstly, PM stated to you that the moment when you, as a non-NATO member, and you see other people having a NATO member, you're going to have like disagreement, and you prompt to attack them. Firstly, those are being countered by the second speaker argument, they're saying that the people is afraid of NATO member, inherently afraid of NATO member, so on and so forth. But even if that's the case, I'm going to tell you why that is good under my argument. Secondly, we believe that there is some key evidence of what NATO really is. My OO already told you that on how you getting NATO is you getting agreement and unanimous vote by the member of NATO. Therefore, we believe that you need to have a very clear and clean status record, to the point that every member would agree for you to join into NATO to begin with. Therefore promoting the idea of a harmonical system within the NATO alliance itself. Another rebuttal is to whether or not the NATO member could do as easily as they could because they have like NATO and big boy USA on their back. We believe that that's a no, right? Because at the end of the day, NATO itself is a defense forcing alliance. It's not an attacking alliance. It's not even a group of economical alliance, politics, so on and so forth. The only politic that happened is to whether or not the people, whether or not the country would appeal as a good person. It is something that is regrettable that the government is not talking about. But even then, it's going to be much more better when NATO itself going to into expansion. With that, my argument. Why does then by not having expanded itself, it will promote harm towards not only the NATO member but also non-NATO member itself? Firstly, what really is the function of NATO other than a big shield for the non-defense, less defense nation? Firstly, we believe that in the status quo right now, NATO is used as a deterrence effect before the conflict happened. It sounds similar to what the OG stated, but hear me out. The idea is NATO would not fight you the moment if you're not fighting the non-NATO member. That itself, the NATO member itself cannot do as much harm, because at the end of the day, the idea is NATO preaching world peace, and world peace that NATO preaching on by a passive and by a passive but emerging power that is happening within NATO, right? But then again, how does the deterrence effect of other people to be get before the conflict that happen? But it is under 2 points. Firstly, presence, and secondly, urgency. We already know the presence of NATO itself, so we're going to go to urgency. What does this mean? It means that NATO need to have so much so up there in the every country list, so that they need to be in the member to begin with. This means what? It means it promotes the idea of every single nation need to meet the criteria that is need to have a good term within the previous NATO member. It means what? It means you as a country need to watch your step if you want to even get into the NATO itself, right? Therefore, prove to you that the idea is people that are wanting to join NATO is not people that wanted to use NATO as a status, but also as a protection and a shelter, because they are incapable to do harm to begin with. But let's just say if they are capable of doing harm to begin with, we believe that the NATO itself is not stupid. Like, we believe that the moment when there's a member that are actually harming people, we believe that the mechanization of kicking out those said member within the same voting from the previous NATO would still going to be okay, right? It is something that is so easily manageable to the point that I believe that in status quo right now that could be taken handle. Now, main point being, the moment when you not expanding, the moment you're not recruiting member, that's the moment when the idea of NATO starting to fall off. Firstly, what does this going to affect NATO? It's mean what? It's mean that NATO going to have somehow making that the standard is God. It mean that the people that are outside the NATO right now are in the lockdown, right? That means what? That means the urgency of people wanting to go to NATO, the urgency of people want to appeal themselves to be good to the other NATO member will be gone. It means what? It's going to be a defense, it's going to be like a big wall barrier, therefore, a big wall barrier that's other nation cannot get into, which means that the argument of the government would actually exist in their own side if they're going to stop expanding. How did this happen? It means what? Now, if you stopping your expanding, it means that no matter how good you are, no matter how willing and how needed you are of the protection, you will not getting it. Which means also what? It means not only it is backlash, but also now this small country going to seek shelter and wanting to have another form of defense alliance. Because of course they want a defense alliance. Of course they need to have another alliance because they're themselves incapable. So now we come to the worst case scenario that happened in this motion within the government side of the house. The moment when NATO is not an option for them to seek shelter, this means they need to find another shelter. Conveniently, government side of the house bring out Mother Russia to the table. Means what? Noticing from the already backlashing background between Russia and USA will be that Russia is going to be attacking play towards this, picking up this deserted non-NATO member, right? It means what? It means that there's going to be there's a chance of conflicting between the non-NATO and NATO member. How does this work? This works to you because while USA and NATO preaching for peace, we cannot per se saying what this third party, another member, another defense force itself. Maybe, perhaps, maybe there's going to be another politic involved, but we afraid the moment when we not going to give them a chance to appeal to NATO, that's the moment when there's another bigger harm that are foreseeable going to happen. And lastly, why does it is okay to expand further and further? Already tells you that there's already barrier, but I'm going to tell you again, this barrier itself is already going to be enough for the status quo, so that while it's not guaranteeing every people to be part of NATO, but it's also going to mean that the standard of you going to be appealing in NATO going to be higher and higher, increasing the urgency of it, therefore in line with the functioning of NATO itself. With that, with that, we believe that the country that unfortunately not going to be getting in the NATO is going to be a country that's going to be so much backlash towards other countries to begin with. Therefore, they need to have something for them to be deterrents so that they could change this to be a better nation, so on and so forth. With that, I think enough.
Thank you for the speech. To open the closing half, I invite member of government here.
Cek. Panel, the reason why Israel still continuing to fire Palestine to run the ethnic cleansing, because Israel believe that if they're not gonna be there's no any country can stop them, because U.S. as the big power of military system in current status quo have the bigger power of military, because they have the members of NATO they already support them, because they think that besides US already being hegemony in military right now, because they actually have the one in countries in the world already control the Middle East as a war and etc. So second, on how actually US already have a lot of military system that, like how they have great weapons and etc. So exactly that why this US still continuing to firing to do this ethnic cleansing to Palestine, because these members of the NATO will, even if the members of NATO will against this kind of this ethnic cleansing doing by this Israel, they cannot do that, because actually if they already agree with this kind of this NATO agreement, because they already joined of that, because they cannot actually, because if they actually try to against this US, if they're going to be the enemy, US will be claim this kind of these members of NATO who actually do not agree with this kind of ethnic cleansing that have done by this Israel, because that actually because in the end of the day US will claim this as enemy, and US might control or might defeat this kind of country, because US will go a door further. When all talk about on how they're gonna strengthen their allies and the country can strong another, and the world peace will be exist. No, because peace will not exist, because first it will because which I have told you before, it will enormously continue the war in the Middle East, for example, because Israel still do the genocide against towards Palestine. And second, even if it exists, it actually will exist in the north countries, the area, the countries that will exist in this north area will already be safe, beside of this attacking from the country. What happened to Ukraine if you letting this kind of Ukraine join this kind of this NATO? We already know that how Ukraine with Russia have a cool war, because actually they have war in the past and etc. And we believe that on how Ukraine already defeat this kind of this Ukraine have defeat Russia, because back of the US in the past, for example, to gain the district that Ukraine won in Russia. So because of that, if they actually when the NATO expand their member to the Ukraine itself, it means that the Ukraine will be not safe anymore. Because why? Because Russia will still going to harm them. It will still going to get what the land that they won in the past. Actually, and because they want to make sure that the Ukraine will not gonna be backed by this US anymore. Ukraine will not gonna fight Russia anymore, because they have a power, because they actually have incentive to be backed by the US. So let's talk about so the peace that they want to be reach will not gonna be exist. Let's talk about OG. Why we are better than OG? Because OG already failed to depict what the NATO have already done in the very first place. They only talk about how Russia and Ukraine will cannot be peace anymore. And even actually they have already depict on how they never did talk you about how different interests are proposed. And second about other countries of it as if other countries of east or not its thought will be blamed, etc. So I thought what OG want to portray in this debate. First, the U.S. will be done their hegemony and military. First, the way they offer the other countries in the north to join, because we will leave that on how U.S. is the big hegemony in military, it means that U.S. will be lead this kind of this NATO. Because I'll tell you on how the proxy of the U.S. already spread and border in this kind of this our current world. It means that this kind of the member will be the tools of the U.S. to reach their hegemony itself, because the weaker countries in the member have the low quality of the military will have to obey as the part of the fight in the war what the UF want to be a war in the very first place. Because if no, US or other will claim you as an enemy that because US already break the agreement in the very first place to join the NATO itself. The likelihood of the countries will be joined. They easily cannot reject because you will be claimed as the enemy to be NATO, and this offering in expansion looks like as the overshadow of US to begin or to reach the successful of the hegemony in the military, and they can take control of all of the kind of the war. Why it is harm? It is harm to the countries because first, part of the country that will be joined will already have great framework with other district country beside of the north or etc. Because for example on how this one of this country in the north have already a good framework in export import with in the China for example. But when the US want to expand their member to this country, it means that US want to try to offend this framework with China, because we already know how China and US have a different interest, a different purpose to begin the hegemony in the economy. And second, it will appear another direct war, because by letting for example, by letting Ukraine at the end of the day this expansion, actually on how Russia the war in Russia, the cool war in Russia, and with their Ukraine will be worse in the other day, because on how example on how we afraid and then we afraid that US can reach their hegemony in military in the world. Because why? Because already know how Biden just state that what was Israel did to Palestine is not genocide. Meanwhile it is genocide, because they have fired this kind of the refugee camp in the safe zone in Rafah, for example, the refugees camp. These are no hope for this. Because of that, these are no hope for Palestine will be free. No other district countries can compete to rise this Palestine success, or Palestine will be free. Or for example, on how Asia cannot support on how Russia cannot support to reach this kind of Palestine, because they actually will fail. Will beat, because they actually gonna be beaten by this kind of this NATO, because they already have control this military and etc. Because it's hard for other bloc or other district countries to support this kind of area, because this NATO already NATO and exactly the US as a leader already exists this kind of this hegemony in a military prone to propose.
Thank you for the speech. To open the case in closing opposition, I invite member of opposition. Here.
All right. Hello? All right. Okay. Judges, do notice how other benches focus on attacking and defending NATO, not its continuous expansion, which should be the focus in this debate. Fortunately, we as CO will shift the focus back to what matters. The focus of today's debate is the continuous expansion. We must look at the timeline here, what happened in the past and what will be in the long-term impact. As closing opposition, we will provide factual counter and also who's the most relevant and important actor in this debate and why should we protect them. Understand that in status quo, not all country has the same military prowess or resources. That is how the term big and small country is coined. These smaller countries here are usually those who have less military power. And so what's the significance of military prowess in status quo, and why does it matter in this debate? Aside from the brute force aspect of military power also has a significant metric of influence in status quo, and this influence can be a determinant between war or not, and also the current world's political climate. To see it in a perspective, for example, to visualize this, Lithuania was quote-unquote protected by the UK, and so no third party is bold enough to incite conflict with Lithuania because they know that it is supported and protected by this bigger military power. We have proven, one, how smaller countries under NATO are benefited, and because they gain protection, and only by continuously expanding NATO, we can extend this protection to more smaller countries like Lithuania. It is morally justified for us to continue expanding to protect even more country, and to protect the most relevant actor here, which are smaller country with less power. Try to defend NATO in the sake of all of Europe's peace, etc. We as CEO, however, have successfully explained who the most relevant actor here and who to protect. That is, we prioritize the smaller country because only by continuing the expansion of NATO will we protect these smaller countries. Two things I will bring in this argument. First of all, how this continuous expansion will change and improve NATO, and also how it will benefit the world's political climate. First, let's see the trend in the countries that's joining NATO. Notice that NATO was made in 1949. It was formed in 1949, post-World War II, and also during the Cold War, right? The early founder of NATO are those countries who are most relevant during World War, whether it be they're directly involved or directly the victim of it, right? For example, France. France was the victim of World War II in the sense that it started the French Revolution. These are countries who are directly affected by the World War. And also, why does this matter, right? If you see from the context slide, Sweden is the latest addition of NATO, which means the countries who were first formed based on their alliances in the World War has now shifted focus more to the morally just system. How do I mechanize this, for example? Let's take the example of the countries that is in NATO right now. For example, Denmark. Denmark has the best educational system. And also Sweden. Sweden has the best and most human and effective prison system. What I'm trying to prove here, these countries that is in NATO right now, in its core genesis, are now peace-loving and humanitarian, both on principle, but also in their practical practices. This has shifted from the early stages of NATO, where there can be dubbed as a warmonger. Because they are continuously expanding, they're continuously progressing into a more peace-loving, humanitarian prioritizing alliances. And this is very likely to still continue in the future. Why? Because only under our house does this already happen in the past, where from, for example, France and UK and the US, the main actor of the World War, now shifted to Sweden, for example, joining in NATO. They're shifting from warmonger to peace-loving. And why does it matter? Only by expanding NATO will the nature of NATO itself change. For example, maybe NATO was first formed as a defense mechanism against, for example, the Germany, for example, right? This is why we believe that only under our house will there be an improvement within NATO itself. And also, by upholding and by expanding NATO, by continuously adding countries in it, the Western, or NATO itself, will have higher influence in the international forum. Why is this a good thing? First of all, we have mentioned before that military prowess definitely is contingent to the amount of influence it has in the current political climate, right? So how does this affect the world's climate if the Western country, or the countries that are quote-unquote peace-loving, has the most influence? What will happen is that globally, these countries will not only uphold the value they already uphold in their own country, for example, humanitarian, peace-loving, but also it will change the course of the world. With the opening benches have also mentioned how smaller countries can seek protection in NATO. But not only that, we believe by continuously expanding NATO, will there be a better chance in upholding peace on the world's peace, right? So what have I proven here? First of all, I have proven here who is the most relevant actor. That is, the smaller countries who seeks protection in NATO, as explained by the opening benches. Smaller countries here seek NATO for example protection, but we have explained better why these countries are dubbed smaller and why these countries is the most relevant and why only under our house will there be more protection to them. We have put importance and we have also put in exclusivity of this benefit, because under the government benches, if they wish to regret this expansion, which means to effectively stop the expansion, these smaller countries will no longer have access to joining NATO and taking this protection. Right. Next point we would like to bring is backlash. If you regret the expansion of NATO, aka stopping it, for example, or at least slowing it down, which means all these countries who have already currently invested so many resources in, for example, supporting NATO in whatever ways, they will be more victimized because the protection they try to seek is no longer exists. Because why? NATO has become more exclusive. They have closed their doors. They have no longer supports other countries, smaller countries that wish to join them. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, right? Even without Ukraine joining NATO in the first place, just by showing that they are inclined, they are interested in joining NATO, they're already actively helped by the US. The US, who is a part of NATO itself. The help that the US provided is only a fraction of what NATO can provide for these smaller countries, a fraction of what all the entirety of NATO can provide for Ukraine. And NATO countries have consistently supported smaller countries that have not joined NATO itself, which means the continuous action of expanding means better, these smaller countries will have better access into resources and also into protection in case of war. Which is why we believe that only under our house will the smaller countries or the most relevant actors be the most protected. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. To close the case in government, I invite Government Whip here.
Check, audible? Okay. Imagine the scenario when you are as a state that we have weakened military system, for example, when there is no advanced technology of military, for example, when there is no advance of nuclear and etc., for example, means that when NATO comes over you, let me hug you, let me protect you, means that there will be naive extension of protective. Because why? Because there will be access of several interests for them to achieve, because that's why they try to bank closest for you. Let's engage on how first. They're talking about on how at the end of the day there will be creating peace and peaceful and etc. in the Saudi house. And we think there will be contradictory on how the interest of NATO itself. Because why? My previous speaker already told you that at the end of the day, yes, you externally getting peaceful, but there is no direct attack by another country, for example. But there will be access of on how you will be crushed internally. Two reasons on that. First, there will be no existence of society trust on you. What I mean in this case, what I mean is there is no society trust. Imagine you as a country and there is you have to expand and standing more in another world. For example, you want to create engage more society in you can. Internally, for example, there will be a contrast on your ideology and etc. Because why? Let first on how at the end of the day you will be selecting on the next delegation of president, for example, Pemilu and etc. For example, once you join NATO, for example, which there is contradictory on how your ideology as a democratic, for example, society will not be directly interested to do this, right? There should be just let it okay. Because why? Because my leader and anything just provide genocide and anything. anything, for example. But second, on how society will be creating, you know, like on how they will be go into the some point on how this system of country rules, like on how once Indonesia, for example, go join NATO and anything, for example, with they as interest of democracy and etc. We provide humanity and anything, for example. Once you go in this, when you join this kind of things, for example, means that there is be existing of you know, like on how you will be controlled by the power of the country, for example, US, means that there will be existing on how you have to follow, have tendency to follow this kind of rules, right? What this will be bad in your society, for example, on how our society will no have contribution and etc. For example, I don't want to pay more taxes to my country, for example, because they just only support genocide and etc. For example, or on how let's just go boycotting on to their economic system and etc. For example, because we don't want anything else will be access in our side of the house. That's why in CG there will be my exclusive. The meaning of peaceful there will be get in our side of the house internally and externally, and I'm going to extend in this my letter speaker my last speech. That's why we think on how the idea of the government of bringing opposition that you will be go on that, you will be get protection on that will be naive. But lastly, on how there will be a success, there will be no peaceful in their side of the house. Because why? Let's see on how the US, for example, as people, as country that have power, for example, because they have advanced technology of military and etc. For example, money and funding, for example, means that if you say no, if they are asking you to do something, for example, means that there is be creating two things. First, state you at the end of the day getting kicked out of this kind of NATO and etc. For example, because why? Because you have no tendency to follow the rules. Like because why? Once you become unite, for example, you have to do anything. But what at the end of the day, there will be access. First, like on how you'll be creating, on how economic can be intervenes you. If you don't follow follow us, for example, we can make a strict regulation of economy to your country, for example, so we can make you more poor, for example, or on how you will be cut any funding and EMF, for example, means that you will be no longer existing and etc. Meaning the idea of you to get protection, for example, in internally will be no exist. Because why? Because you will be become at the end of the day on how as tools for this kind of country, for example, to become you know to get to achieve to achieve their goals and etc. But at the end of the day, let's see on how CO portraying, yes, you can get yes, you can become more advanced and anything, because like on how Sweden and France, we think this kind of scenario only exists on exclusive country, for example, on how they are already good in their society and etc. For example, but there will be no access on how the country, for example, Ukraine, right? Like on how you have the interest of to join NATO, for example, but once Russia doesn't want you go. But why is this bad at the end of the day? First, there will be creating more corrupt in your internally, like on how you will be, you know, like you already have lose a lot of military, you know, military people, because you have no tendency to protect yourself, for example, or on how there will be excessive costs because due to war, for example. Meaning their scenario only exists if you are already good, for example, if you are already developed enough, for example, to creating more sustainable and more balances to your country, right? Meaning in our side of the house, all of these things, like you already suffer, for example, like you on how you already know have you know, like no good military and anything, for example, means that you will be creating more you will be creating more suffering in the future. But lastly, why at the end of the day there will be creating unfair, there will be still no peaceful anything? I think like on how at the end of the day there is people will be still getting controlling on the on this kind of country, for example, because like on how the US, for example, control Israel to attack Palestine, for example, because that is why Israel has getting funding and etc. For example, Israel getting help by the US, for example. That's why there is like on how they will be getting attacked, and they will like that is only because of Israel. Meaning any allies or outside of NATO, for example, will be directly will be hate you, because why? Because you already directly you will be contributing this kind of genocide. Like this will be crush you internally. Meaning like on how like boycott, for example, people will be like just don't buy their product and etc. Like just don't go with economic trade with them, because there is will be getting genocide and things, right? Meaning all of your ideology become one country that will be you know getting nouns in the word. For example, you will be getting standing equally. For example, will be no exist because you already have you already have no equality from you internally. Meaning all of this kind of peaceful will be hard you for you to exist, or on how the society will be creating mess of like getting them on and etc. For example, because they think this is really unfair to on how your country ideology to protect your society. For example, will be hard, will be just become useless. That's why we think all of the protection and peaceful will be hard for you to exist. That's why we oppose.
Thank you for the speech. To close the debate overall, I call upon opposition whip. Here.
Hello, everyone. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The international politics is in a very volatile era right now, as war after war keeps happening. This makes it even more relevant now than ever, the inclusiveness of anti-war and peace-inclined organizations such as NATO. Now, before I move on to my expansions, let me get a couple of rebuttals out of the way. Starting with the OG. To address them, they mentioned about the incentive that will be created by NATO opening up, right? NATO is an organization of safety and defense. So to garner the favor of NATO, obviously, these countries that are competing will be more incentivized for like peaceful or peace-inclined actions, meaning how this will look like on the international forum is to create a good impact of like a peaceful environment in the international forum. Now, they also brought up the example of Ukraine and Russia. A couple of things I would like to address. 3 things. Number 1, sure, the O have addressed this, but we are willing to be more charitable and connect this to the motion. Number 1, to blame Ukraine as the major catalyst for the war is demeaning, right? As the OG themselves acknowledged, this has been a recurring problem. This has been a recurring conflict that exists pre-NATO. Second thing, NATO to Ukraine is safety. It's to help them to be able to survive despite the aggressiveness of Russia. And the last thing, which contains 2 sub-points. Number 1, countries send Ukraine resources, and number 2, NATO countries open their borders for Ukraine refugee. Why does these 2 things happen? All this happened because NATO's inclination to open themselves, right? NATO's inclusiveness, despite Ukraine not yet being a part of NATO. If NATO had already closed themselves, if NATO were to be exclusive, those 2 things would not happen, right? Meaning Ukraine would be in an even more vulnerable position than they are already. Now, moving on to how they said U.S. supporting genocide because they are protected by NATO. 2 things about this, untrue and unimportant. Number 1, why untrue? U.S. itself is one of NATO's powerhouses, right? Meaning, so even if like U.S. doesn't have NATO, they will still have powers. 2 things about U.S. Number 1, U.S. dollar acts as the monetary reserves. So countries will, even if U.S. is not a part of NATO, country will still be afraid to attack U.S. as attacking U.S. would mean instability on the global market. Second thing about U.S., and especially more relevant on the Palestinian and Israel conflict, is that U.S. has veto power under the UN Security Council, which means U.S. holds the power under UN Security Council. This will be addressed even more later, but furthermore, to my point of unimportance, that is a veto that happened under the UN Security Council. So NATO has no relevance in the discussion of the Palestinian genocide, as the OG didn't give an explanation at all as to the relation between NATO and UN, right? And then the last thing they mentioned was about check in power and balance. Now, 2 things about this. Number 1, the inclination of more countries joining NATO means there will be more voices heard inside NATO. And the second thing is there will be more countries to be check in balance. There will be more countries to be more incentivized to be peace. Why is that? Towards the US, let's start by their cherry-picked example, right? US has the power, unlike other organizations like the UN, but not under NATO, as they don't have any special positions under NATO. Sure, they're one of the building countries, but other than that, they don't have any special veto power, nor are they the monetary reserve under NATO, which means NATO exists as the peaceful organization, which is the only peaceful organization to keep US to have like a peaceful inclination, right? They are the only organization in which to keep the check and balance of US to exist. And like they mentioned about how this power of influence will affect on other countries. put into comparison how this will look like under our bench and under the government bench. Under the government bench, if NATO were to be exclusive, the power and the pressure would be exclusively applied to these smaller countries. However, if NATO were to open themselves to these smaller countries, how would this look like? This will mean that the pressure is now not on them. Even if it was on them, at least now there's a likelihood of that benefiting these smaller countries, as these smaller countries now have means to join NATO. Now, to address a couple of points that the closing government made, US military again and again being brought, right? Again, US is already powerful even without NATO, as the veto rights and everything. Now, what makes NATO different is that they're an organization exclusively focused on defending, on deterring conflict, on deterring war. This is the only platform in which the US has no special power, meaning this is the only check and balance that exists for the US. As Natasha have beautifully mentioned about how the opening up of NATO has made NATO even more progressive and have made NATO has even more care towards human rights. Imagine NATO closing. This will create an exclusive bubble of NATO, right? This will stop NATO from progressing to be more peaceful inclined. This will mean that the check and balance that right now is the exclusive check and balance for a powerful country like the US to cease from existing. Now, to continue on the point of backlash, they also mentioned something about backlash, but we believe that backlash will be more likely happening under their side of the house, as countries now, even more than ever, are even more peace inclined. So the likelihood of backlash happening from the people towards a country to join NATO is incredibly low. If Indonesia were to join NATO, Indonesian citizens would know that NATO is to protect them. NATO would be benefiting to them. So the backlash will not happen that way. In comparison, the backlash would be more likely happening under their side of the house. As again, as Natasha had mentioned, if NATO were to suddenly close, were to suddenly be exclusive, all the countries who have been incentivized to be more peaceful, or the countries who have been trying to gain the favor of NATO, all the countries who have put resources would then be backlash. Not just that, but the backlash would also exist on the citizen level, as those resources of these countries come from the citizen. And the last thing they mentioned was about countries, smaller countries especially, acting as tool. Again, 2 points of this. Number one, as we have explained by what happens in NATO, the characteristics and the principle of NATO country, as have been explained extensively by Natasha, again, this will not happen, as NATO right now, even more than ever, especially due to them being open, especially due to them being inclusive, means they are even more progressive and they care even more about smaller countries, right? And second, even if this was true, it would still be better. Why? For small countries, we believe that it would still be better for small countries to comply and to follow and to help fellow NATO members, as opposed to them just getting excluded out of NATO with no help, getting attacked by Russia, right? We believe that it would still be fine for them to even be used as tool, as opposed to them getting the treatment in which Ukraine received without any help. Because imagine if Ukraine, to visualize it, just imagine if Ukraine were to get attacked by Russia, but under their side of the house, Ukraine now would not have the means to defend themselves. Ukraine now would look like having no further resources, help, and having no places to call refugee, right? A couple of extensions I'd like to make before just concluding my debate. Ultimately, only under our house has every demand been addressed and sufficiently met. And that is why we deserve to win this debate. Thank you.
Cool, that marks the end of the debate. For every participant, please go directly to UTCC. Best of luck for everyone. For all observers and LO, please also go outside. Thank you, everyone.